The text lit up my screen at 7:02 a.m., right as I poured the first cup of coffee. I'm leaving. Don't bother calling, I've moved on. It's better this way. For both of us. No name. No goodbye. Just Lucas's final act of carelessness, delivered with all the emotional weight of a bad weather alert. I stared at the words for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like a heavy fog. Better for both of us? I thought, setting my mug down with deliberate calm. He had left without a conversation, a confrontation, or even a shred of decency. A decade together, unraveled in 24 characters. Lucas's exit wasn't just cowardly. It was a betrayal of everything I thought we'd built. But even as the anger and hurt began to bubble under the surface, I didn't break. I didn't hurl the phone across the room, or let the sobs he probably expected erupt. Instead, I moved with quiet deliberation, each action precise, each breath steady. I locked the screen and picked up my planner, the one Lucas used to tease me about. He said I liked to control things too much. Maybe that's why he thought a text message was all it would take to wreck me. He was wrong. By 7:30 a.m., I had updated the utilities account, emailed my landlord, and set a meeting with my attorney for the next day. I wasn't just tying up the loose ends of my life with Lucas. I was cutting them cleanly. No room for unraveling. I closed the laptop and looked around the apartment. His things still littered the space. His worn leather jacket hung on the back of the chair, his books stacked haphazardly on the shelves, and his cologne lingering faintly in the air. For a fleeting moment, the ache clawed at my chest. This was the home we were supposed to build together. The future he promised me in words he didn't have the courage to keep. I poured the coffee down the sink. The betrayal had shaken me, but it wouldn't break me. Lucas had chosen his way out, a path littered with disregard and arrogance. But me? I would choose resilience. Tomorrow, I decided, would be for beginnings, not endings. The warning signs were there. Tiny cracks in the facade Lucas wore so well. For months, I'd noticed the late-night work calls, the evasive looks when his phone buzzed, and the faint whiff of perfume that wasn't mine. At first, I convinced myself they were nothing more than the shadows of my own insecurities. But shadows have a way of creeping into the light, and Lucas was careless with his secrets. I remember the night I found the receipt. A dinner for two at an upscale restaurant I knew we'd never been to. It had slipped out of his wallet while he rummaged for cash, and the way he stuffed it back without a word sent a chill down my spine. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I started to prepare. The next morning, I opened a separate bank account. I told myself it was for emergencies, a rainy day fund, but deep down I knew it was insurance. I started tracking his excuses and discrepancies, jotting them down in a small notebook I tucked behind the sweaters in my closet. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. If my marriage was unraveling, I needed to know why and how. Lucas's behaviors grew bolder as the weeks passed. He came home later, his explanations thinner, his phone always face down on the counter. One Sunday morning while he was in the shower, a text lit up his screen. It was from Jake, or so his phone claimed. The preview said, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach tightened, but my hands were steady as I locked the screen. I didn't need to read the rest. I already knew. My next steps were deliberate. I started transferring small amounts of money into my new account, careful not to draw attention. I consulted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire, who confirmed what I suspected. Lucas's financial habits were as reckless as his loyalty. Together, we began assembling a case, a shield against whatever fallout might come. I wasn't naive to the pain of what I was doing. Every step felt like a betrayal of the life we were supposed to have. But I couldn't afford to be sentimental. Lucas had already made his choices. He just didn't know I'd seen through them. By the time his text came, the groundwork was already in place. My accounts were secure, the documentation filed, and the future I'd begun to imagine without him felt less like a daydream and more like a plan. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lucas thought he'd blindsided me with his departure, but he had no idea I'd seen it coming from a mile away. He had underestimated me, and that was his first mistake. His second was thinking I'd crumble. The seeds of his betrayal had taken root, but I'd planted something stronger in their place, resolve. And now I was ready to watch it grow. Lucas couldn't resist trying to twist the knife. His texts came sporadically, each one a cocktail of condescension and veiled threats. I hope you're not getting any ideas about making this messy. It's not worth the fight, Lily. By the way, the rent is due soon. Guess that's your problem now. You never appreciated what I did for us, but maybe this will teach you. It was almost laughable. This was the same man who had borrowed $2,000 from our joint savings for a business opportunity that turned out to be a failed cryptocurrency scheme. The same man who thought his charm could replace responsibility. I didn't reply. Not to any of them. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Claire, who filed them neatly into the growing case file. Each snide remark, every petty jab, became another brick in the wall I was building between his chaos and my future. Lucas thought he was playing the game, but I had rewritten the rules. The day he abandoned me, he left behind more than just his worn leather jacket and half-empty cologne bottles. He left behind a trail of evidence. The credit card statement showed dinners, gifts, and hotel bookings for dates he'd sworn he was working late. The receipts I'd collected told a story he'd never admit to my face. But the real blow came when Claire uncovered the truth about his finances. Lucas had been drowning in debt for years, juggling credit cards and payday loans to keep up the appearance of success. His accounts were riddled with overdrafts and late fees, and he had burned through the little savings we had. The rental agreement was in both our names, but the lease had his signature first, a careless oversight he would soon regret. When Claire served him the legal notice outlining our separation terms, his response was predictably immature. "You're going to regret this, Lily. You're not as smart as you think you are." That was Lucas's fatal flaw. He never saw me for who I really was. He saw the quiet, organized woman who made sure the bills were paid on time and the groceries never ran out. He didn't see the strategist behind the surface, the woman who had anticipated his moves and planned for every contingency. The power shifted when the court froze our joint account, leaving him without access to what little was left. Lucas's plan to skate by on my dime crumbled overnight, and his texts became increasingly desperate. "Lily, we can work this out. Don't you think you're overreacting? You don't want to ruin me, do you? We were a team once." I read them with the same detachment I might feel reading a stranger's grocery list. Lucas was unraveling, his confidence fraying at the edges as he realized he wasn't in control anymore. I stayed silent. Every word he sent was another thread I could pull, and I intended to let him unravel himself completely. The more Lucas tried to provoke me, the more his overconfidence exposed him. Every admission he made about his debts, his infidelity, his belief that I was too soft to fight back, strengthened my position. Meanwhile, I moved quietly and decisively, guided by Claire's sharp advice and my own unflinching resolve. Lucas had underestimated me, but now he was learning. Piece by piece, his carefully constructed narrative was falling apart, leaving him with nothing but the wreckage of his own choices. And as I watched it happen, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. This wasn't just a fight for my future. It was a reclamation of the person I had always been. The person Lucas had tried to suppress with his lies and manipulation. The person who was finally irrevocably free. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature but in atmosphere. It was a sterile clinical space where the chaos Lucas had unleashed would finally be dissected and judged. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer Claire beside me, her confidence radiating like armor. Across the room, Lucas slouched in his chair, his once easy charm replaced by an air of nervous bravado. He glanced at me once, a sneer flickering across his face before he turned away. I held his gaze for a beat longer, letting him know I wasn't afraid. The proceedings began with Claire laying out the facts in a steady, deliberate tone. "Your Honor, this case is about accountability and justice. My client, Mrs. Lily Hart, has endured deceit, financial irresponsibility, and abandonment at the hands of Mr. Lucas Hart. Today, we will prove that her actions were not only justified but necessary to protect herself from his reckless behavior." Lucas shifted uncomfortably as Claire presented the evidence, starting with his financial mismanagement. The court projector displayed his bank statements. The overdrafts, the frivolous expenditures, the unexplained withdrawals. The receipts I'd quietly collected over the months, luxury dinners, hotel bookings, and boutique purchases, were laid bare for everyone to see. Mr. Hart has demonstrated a pattern of financial irresponsibility that directly jeopardized the shared assets and stability of the marriage, Claire stated firmly. This, Your Honor, is why Mrs. Hart took steps to secure her own finances in anticipation of his abandonment. Lucas's lawyer tried to spin the narrative, painting me as vindictive and overly controlling, but Claire dismantled their arguments with precision. Vindictive, she repeated, her voice calm but sharp. The only vindictive actions here are Mr. Hart's, leaving his wife with a dismissive text message while draining their joint account to fund his debts and an extramarital affair. Mrs. Hart's meticulous record-keeping isn't vindictive. It's evidence of a woman who refused to be a victim. Then came the moment Lucas hadn't anticipated. The exposure of his infidelity, the texts from his mistress, the receipts for romantic getaways, and the undeniable timelines Claire presented painted a damning picture. Lucas's face reddened as the details unfolded, his smugness crumbling under the weight of the truth. The judge leaned forward, his expression stern. Mr. Hart, it is evident from the evidence presented that your actions were not only irresponsible but deceitful. Your attempt to manipulate the situation and leave your spouse financially vulnerable is unacceptable. Lucas tried to interject, his voice laced with desperation. Your Honor, I was under stress. Things got complicated. The judge held up a hand, silencing him. Stress does not excuse betrayal and recklessness. The court rules in favor of Mrs. Hart. Claire's steady hand on my arm kept me grounded as the judge finalized the rulings. Lucas was to pay spousal support to compensate for his financial misconduct, relinquish any claim to the apartment, and settle the debts he had accrued independently. The gavel came down with a decisive crack, and it was over. The consequences of Lucas's betrayal extended far beyond the courtroom. Word of the ruling spread quickly, tarnishing his reputation. His professional circle, once tolerant of his swagger, began to distance themselves as his debts and dishonesty became public knowledge. Friends who had once laughed at his stories of outsmarting the system now viewed him as reckless and untrustworthy. The mistress he'd so confidently flaunted? She disappeared shortly after the ruling, leaving him to face the fallout alone. I walked out of the courtroom that day with a strange sense of peace. I hadn't just won the legal battle. I'd reclaimed my life. Lucas had always underestimated me, thinking his charm could outshine my intelligence, his recklessness overpower my resolve. But now he was left with nothing but the weight of his own choices. As Claire and I stepped into the sunlight, she turned to me with a rare smile. You didn't just survive, Lily. You won. I nodded, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in years. Lucas had lost everything, but I had gained something far more valuable. Freedom. 6 months after the divorce, my life was unrecognizable, in the best way possible. What began as a small boutique marketing firm, a passion project I'd built while Lucas dismissed it as a hobby, had grown into a national name. A feature in a prominent business magazine called me the woman who rebuilt her life and her brand. Clients flooded in after that, drawn to my story and my results. I had expanded my team, secured a sleek new office space, and launched campaigns for companies I once only dreamed of working with. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel stable, I felt powerful. Lucas's life, on the other hand, was a cautionary tale unfolding in real time. His financial woes made him the subject of whispered conversations among former friends and colleagues. Rumors of unpaid loans and bounced checks spread quickly. The mistress he'd left me for? She walked out when his debts and diminished status became too much to bear. Even his family, once staunch defenders of his actions, had begun to see the truth. His sister Caroline reached out to me unexpectedly one afternoon. Lily, she said, her voice hesitant. I wanted to apologize for how we treated you. We believed Lucas because, well, we wanted to. But seeing what he's done, she paused, her voice heavy with regret. You deserved better. You are better. It was strange to hear those words, but I didn't hold on to bitterness. Lucas had been his own worst enemy. I didn't need to convince anyone of that. The consequences of his actions spoke louder than I ever could. My newfound success didn't just come in the form of professional achievements. I discovered joy in the small things again. The freedom to redecorate my apartment exactly how I wanted. The satisfaction of solo vacations to places Lucas had always dismissed as too boring. and the simple pleasure of mornings spent sipping coffee without the weight of someone else's chaos. But the greatest victory wasn't something external. It was how I felt about myself. I'd shed the version of me who second-guessed everything, who tiptoed around Lucas's moods, who feared what life might look like without him. In her place stood someone stronger, sharper, and unapologetically independent. The recognition of my growth came in ways both big and small. A major retailer reached out, wanting me to design a campaign for their national rebranding. At the same time, my neighbor, a quiet woman I barely knew, stopped me in the hallway. "I just wanted to say," she said, holding a bag of groceries, "I saw your story online. You're inspiring. It gives me hope, you know." I smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." Lucas, meanwhile, hit his lowest point when he was fired from his job. His charm had gotten him far, but charm doesn't balance the books or erase bad decisions. His descent was public and painful, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel vindicating to see his entitlement catch up with him. One night, while reviewing a new project, I got an email from him. "Lily, I messed up. I see that now. I miss you. I was wrong and I hope you can forgive me. Can we meet and talk?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before closing the laptop. Lucas's words no longer had any power over me. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Life had moved on, and so had I. In the end, my greatest triumph wasn't watching Lucas's life fall apart. It was realizing I didn't need his downfall to validate my success. My victories were mine alone, built on resilience, preparation, and the unwavering belief that I deserved more. Lucas had tried to define me by his betrayal, but I had redefined myself in the aftermath. And in that, I had already won. The text message hangs on the wall of my office, framed in sleek black, a quiet testament to how far I've come. It's the first thing people notice when they walk in. "I'm leaving. Don't bother calling, I've moved on. It's better this way. For both of us." Some laugh nervously, unsure if it's meant to be a joke. Others pause, studying the words like a riddle waiting to be solved. I never explain it outright. It's not about Lucas anymore. It's about me. That text, cruel as it was, marked the moment my old life ended and my new one began. It was the spark I didn't know I needed, the catalyst that turned my pain into something powerful. Sitting at my desk, I sip coffee from a ceramic mug painted with the words, "Build Your Own Empire," in bold gold letters. My office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and bustling city view, is a space I designed to reflect the woman I've become. Confident, intentional, and unshakable. I think back to the days after Lucas left, how fragile I felt, and how I questioned everything about myself. I remember staring at his words on my phone, feeling like they were etched into my soul. But I also remember what came next, the steps I took to reclaim my life, the strength I found in the chaos. Lucas's betrayal wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The framed text is more than a memento. It's a symbol, a reminder of the woman who refused to be broken, who turned her darkest moment into the foundation for a brighter future. It's a quiet nod to everyone who's ever underestimated me, and a beacon for others who might need to see that resilience is possible. In the months following my divorce, I began sharing my journey. Not out of anger or bitterness, but out of hope. Through interviews, speaking engagements, and articles, I've connected with women who saw themselves in my story. Each email, each handshake, each whispered thank you reminds me that my experience, painful as it was, has a purpose. One message stood out to me recently. It was from a young woman named Tessa who had just left an abusive relationship. "I read about you and thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Thank you for showing me it's possible." I smiled when I read it, remembering the neighbor who once said the same to me. The ripple effect of sharing my truth is more powerful than I could have imagined. Lucas is little more than a footnote now. His name doesn't sting the way it once did. I hear whispers about him from time to time, more debts, more mistakes, more failed relationships, but they feel distant, almost irrelevant. His actions set my life on fire, but I chose to rise from the ashes, stronger and sharper than before. My journey isn't about revenge. It's about thriving. It's about proving to myself, and anyone else who's listening, that pain doesn't have to define you, can transform you. I stand by the window watching the city hum with life below. The framed text message catches the sunlight, Its words no longer heavy with hurt but light with possibility. Lucas's betrayal tried to break me. Instead, it gave me a story worth telling. A story of resilience, empowerment, and the quiet, undeniable strength of choosing to rise.